and to the episode that we did on you, which must have been a joy, a great entertaining moment, and have some points that you'd like to, raise with us or push back on. And then, assuming we end up with time, there's some other topics that we might cover that we have different opinions on, but I think some of them might come up in the points that you might raise. So let's see. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Happy to do it.
It's interesting when people do. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I seem to remember, again, I did listen to the audio, but it's been a while. I seem to remember two things stood out. One is that you faulted me for my lab leak episode with Matt Ridley and Alina Chan. You seem to wish that I had done much more adversarial research and was far less credulous on the point of the lab leak hypothesis, and you seem to suggest that I had some commitment to believing in a lab leak as opposed to a zoonotic origin, which really I don't. I mean, my only hobby horse to ride into that conversation was that the lab leak hypothesis always struck me as totally plausible and not at all racist. And as you know, it was immediately condemned as a racist symptom of bigotry, largely because it's some version of it had come out of Trump's mouth. But it was always plausible, and it is in fact still plausible. I mean, I've since listened to your episode, which followed mine, where you brought on you had your experts on, and yes, if I had heard that before I recorded with Matt and Alina, I might have asked a few more skeptical questions. But the truth is, even in the aftermath of hearing your episode, it's still, the jury's still out on. It's still totally respectable to believe that a lab leak is at least still possible. And as you know, the intelligence community is split on it. I think the FBI and the DOE still claim that it's likely of lab origin based on evidence that is not publicly available, if I'm not mistaken. And as for trusting the community of virologists, there are reasons to, this also came out a little bit in my episode with Matt and Alina. There are reasons to worry that the world's leading virologists were not altogether forthcoming, both around what happened and around what they actually suspected. Donald McNeil, the New York Times writer who has covered pandemics for 25 years for the Times until he was defenestrated for woke reasons, as you might know. He just came out with a book talking about how he knows that some of the leading virologists in America really lied to him. I mean, they kind of circled the wagons, and he I think through a Freedom of Information Act, he got their Slack communication, and they were collaborating to lead him astray when he was reporting on the possibility of a lab leak, early on, again, working for the New York Times. And he's talked about that in his book. That is, again, this has come out since I recorded my podcast. So I would, if I were going to do that interview again with Matt and Alina, I would plow in a few of your skeptical points from your episode, certainly, but it's just it's still sort of in coin toss zone for me whether it's zoonotic or lab leak, and we certainly can't trust the CCP to be forthcoming and transparent on this subject. I mean, they have not been good collaborators at all in this. They've just been stark adversaries as far as I know. So, I don't trust the virologists entirely. I mean, I've done other episodes on my concern around virus hunting, and, the Deep Vision program that has since been abandoned for the United States was, in my mind, a total scandal intellectually and ethically. I think a lot of that work is deeply suspect, and the fact that there are any virologists who don't see that now is of great concern to me. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my vomiting up my memory of what my reaction was when I heard your criticism.
There's a couple of points there, Sam, that I think, like, one thing that we would definitely agree on is that it's not off the table to reasonable scientists, non-scientists, to consider the possibility of a lab leak. And I think all of the experts that we discussed with also made that point. And also that even that, it's perfectly reasonable that people would be skeptical when they hear various details, and that we are right to not trust, the CCP account, which, to be clear, they were also denying that there were any, relevant animals being sold in markets initially and so on. So the CCP, not being forthcoming seems like a given that most actors in this space would agree on.
Actually, the one point I would add there, which I forgot to say, is that it's always struck me as strange that there is this preference for the zoonotic wet market story, because that actually strikes me as politically the more invidious and, not to say racist account. I mean, it's just, I just think it's a worse look for the Chinese to be maintaining these atrocious wet markets and imperiling all of humanity because they can't figure out how to stop eating raccoon dogs and pangolins and all the other crap they have in these markets piled on top of each other. It's just that looks more barbaric and insane than a lab leak. The lab leaks happen to everyone. The most civilized, most careful societies have lab leaks. We know that, and it's a great concern. But the idea that there would be this passionate bias as a hedge against so-called racism and xenophobia for a zoonotic origin makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah, of course, you're talking about political narratives and preferences and spin,
right, but that is the preference I detect in the reaction to anyone who has speculated about a lab leak.
Yeah, I mean the other lens to look at it. I mean, this is how we try to approach it, is that you focus on the scientific evidence rather than the spin either way. And, as far as I understand, the scientific consensus has only firmed up since the interviews that you had and we had. The discourse is always there. There's always political stuff going on. Trump was definitely using the issue as a political football. There was definitely a reaction against that, claiming about xenophobia and racism, whatever. But that's all on the surface of the discourse, right? Underneath that, you either believe that all the scientists are corrupt and they're all in the pocket of somebody, or you believe that there is actually a community of career virologists, experts and specialists who don't really care much about Trump or the CCP or anything like that, and are actually beavering away to figure out, the evidence on where the virus actually came from.
And I would say, Sam, that the experts we spoke to, one of them, Michael Rohrbe, for example, was on a paper originally arguing for more efforts to be put into investigating the lab leak origins, but he subsequently changed his position based on investigations and evidence. And all the experts that we talked to in that episode, they weren't saying it's racist they ever consider it. They were saying the overwhelming weight of evidence continues to point to this being likely. They were talking about the genetic evidence and the epidemiological evidence and so on. And on the counter side, and this is kind of the criticism, I think the main criticism that at least I was levying, is that very recently there was an expert survey on, the general weight that you attach of probability to a lab leak versus a natural zoonosis origin. And the results show from epidemiologists and virologists, overwhelmingly, the consensus is that a lab leak is less likely, right? It's something like 80% in relevant virologists were on the side of natural zoonosis being more likely. But that's still saying that there's scope for disagreement. But Alina Chan and Matt Ridley, in this case, when you spoke to them, they presented the case that there was a very strong implication that virologists are potentially conspiring to hide their own culpability. And in the case of a lot of the people that we're talking to, that clearly doesn't seem to be the motivation. Whereas on the lab leak side, there are people who now have profiles purely about promoting the lab leak as a possibility. And in the case of Matt Ridley, who I know is a respected science writer, and I know that many people are fond of him, Richard Dawkins rates him and so on, but he also does have a history of advocating various fringe positions, including on climate contrarianism, alternative origins, the HIV, AIDS.
Well, that just to be clear, that I knew nothing about. but again, you have to take people's views as they come. I mean, obviously, some people can entertain sufficiently crazy ideas that I would never want to talk to them. But and RFK Jr. is one of those people. But yeah, I mean, Matt is a totally respected science writer about biology, and he's written a bunch of books that many people have found valuable. And as you say, Dawkins is one of them. And yeah, I can't. I can't be held responsible for views of his that I'm not aware of. I know he's been somewhat contrarian with respect to climate, but there's a bunch of people in that bin who we can't cancel.
You talked about usually in the context of the rampant conspiracism that you see all over the place, but including in the Brett Weinstein side of the aisle, wherever that is, right? Mm-hmm. Or Alex Jones or Elon Musk. And they show a tendency to endorse a wide variety of conspiracies. It isn't just one. It's, there is a history of conspiracism, that it should lower your assessment when they're alleging another conspiracy, right? Like, at least not that the conspiracy is true, but the fact that they are alleging it means something significant, because they are prone to allege conspiracies. So in that case, I heard you very eloquently talk about, with Joe Rogan or Brett Weinstein, that they're selecting experts on COVID, people like Pierre Corey or Robert Malone, who have genuine credentials, Peter McCulloch, and they then give their audience the impression that because there's no respectable figure to kind of like debate back the following week, that the fringe position is much more firm and convincing than it is. So there seemed a potential parallel there from if your podcast has on like Alina Chan and Matt Ridley and then leaves the lab leak issue alone. I would imagine that a lot of your audience would come away thinking that a lot of the criticisms that they put are convincing because they pushed them in a very convincing way. So like the experts that we had on, if you think those questions are worth answering, why not seek out to, raise them with them?
Well, I would have had I known them. Again, you did your podcast after I did mine, right? So I didn't have I need a time machine to be fully informed. And it is true that I didn't do much more than read their book to prepare for that interview. So it's not like I went into this having preloaded my brain with lots of reasons to be skeptical of their thesis. But actually the line we took in that interview was I thought fairly balanced. I mean, anyone listening to that interview would come out feeling like, well, the lab leak certainly seems very likely, or more likely than not, perhaps. I mean, but it was still sort of in coin toss zone. It wasn't like this is 99%. We have a 99% confidence that it was of lab origin, and neither Matt nor Alina were claiming that. I mean, I think hearing your interviews, I probably became a little more skeptical of the lab leak origin, but still, now, again, it's still not a decided question. You still have the Department of Energy and the FBI saying it's likely based on evidence that we can't see. And again, you should listen to Donald McNeil's account or read his account in his recent book of what it was like to deal with the virologists, right? I mean, there was a circling of the wagons. There was a pretending to be settled on zoonotic origin when behind closed doors they were saying, "Oh shit, this looks like a lab leak," right? So I'm not, as far as that doesn't answer the basic scientific charge that your guest made, which I think is very interesting. I forget some of the details, but if memory serves, perhaps the most interesting was that it looks like there were two origin stories, right, from that suggests more of a zoonotic origin as opposed to a lab leak origin. But in any case, it's yeah. I mean, I don't know that we can extract much more wisdom from this. I realize I didn't do the interview you wished I had done, but it is just true that I did not have much prior bias one way or the other going in. It just, my really strong bias was everyone who was claiming that the lab leak thesis was racism was a moron, right? And should be chastised as such until the end of the world. So that's still where I stand.
Okay, I think Chris disputes some of the minor points in some of that, but we're not going to let him respond. We can let the lab leak lie, I think, for now. So, Sam, was there